Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So on Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, we got a little bit of a shocker report from Jacob Stoller of Sportsnet. He's a Winnipeg-based reporter saying that I'm hearing Jared McCann could be made available before the deadline, which, yeah, pretty surprising considering he signed this year, next year, and the year after at only $5 million and is 28 years old. And when looking at Jared McCann, basically ever since he got to Seattle, he has been a very effective top sixer, peaking in 2023 with a 40-goal season. And even this year, he's having a big down year in terms of goal scoring, but still has 42 points in 57 games. The underlying numbers have been awesome. Outside of his finishing, he's still been very, very good this season. So if you're watching this by now, either Elliot Friedman, Darren Dreger, Frank Saravalli have come out to kind of confirm this. Not saying I didn't believe Stoller's initial report, but I just wanted to wait to fully publish this until we got a more credible source on this, a more league-wide source. But yeah, Jared McCann apparently available. That is big. This guy is going to fetch a lot if he ends up getting traded for the Seattle Kraken because, again, that contract is so massive, especially with the cap rising for a guy that has gotten 40 goals relatively recently and is a consistent 30-ish goal guy at $5 million for 2.5 more seasons, man. That's a steal. That's going to be like that already is, for the most part, like good third-liner money, low-end second-liner money. So I decided to ask you guys to send me your hypothetical trades, and I think given the circumstances, age, contract, and level of play, I think that the price is like a first and a B-plus prospect, a good young player, and maybe a second or a third round pick, or a very good prospect in a second or a third round pick. This is going to be a lot of teams are going to be after him if he is truly available, if he is made available during the deadline or even in the offseason, because it's not like they're going to be like, oh, he's available for the deadline, then they don't trade him and then just like completely take him off the trade block. Some of these deals are more so going to have to be get done in the offseason. But yeah, we're going to go through it now and let's react to it. Up first from JB Live S says, to the Bruins for a 2025 first and Matt Poitras. I think that this is relatively fair value. It's just the team fit on this I don't think makes a ton of sense considering Boston is out of a playoff spot right now. Being this aggressive, especially trading your 2025 first, maybe if this was your 2026, 2027, or you like added a lottery protection that would kick it to the following year if they missed the playoffs. But yeah, Boston definitely still in the wild card race, but I'm not sure ownership would allow Don Sweeney to kind of pull this Hail Mary, mortgage their future. And again, McCann isn't some kind of rental. He'd fit into the core pretty effectively in terms of age-wise. But yeah, I could understand why Boston Bruins fans would not be too keen on this because this pick could be decently high. It could easily be top 13, top 12, and Matty Poitras is by far their best under 24 player. Mason Lohrei as well. I'm not sure if they did this deal at last year's deadline, I think it would make a lot of sense to kind of go for it when they were safely in a playoff spot. Right now, I wouldn't be too keen on it. Next up, Reginald Docs Long says McCain to LA for a first in Liam Greentree. I'm getting Liam Greentree out of that deal unless it's like literally Liam Greentree for Jared McCann. I think that highly of him. But if it was a lesser prospect in a first round pick, yeah, I would really like the LA Kings to kind of go for it in terms of some kind of aggressive move. He really fits their core in terms of guys like Kevin Fiala, Adrian Kempe, all in their mid to late 20s. And LA, we talk about it a lot on this page, don't really have that superstar forward that most Stanley Cup contenders have. But I think having McCann, Kempe, Fiala, Kopitar, that aggregate together, and assuming Byfield hopefully gets back on track, can kind of make up for the lack of star power. I think that would be an aggressive move for the LA Kings, but not Liam Greentree. Not Liam Greentree. That guy has been too much of a beast the last 2 years in the OHL. They got an absolute steal. 26 years old, 26th overall. Maybe Alex Lafreniere in a first-round pick, maybe a second-round pick instead, just bolster that, but I wouldn't really touch Greentree quite yet. The Toronto Maple Leafs from Josh Crozen, Cowan in a second-round pick. Yeah, Easton Cowan, his stock has kind of gone down of late since that World Juniors, but I think this would be a sizable move for each party. I think that you would have to include Max Domi just to make the salary cap work in terms of this season, because Easton Cowan obviously is on an ELC and not even playing with the NHL team. But yeah, Domi, Cowan, a second, and a third. I think that'd be a pretty solid return for the Seattle Kraken. They could also flip Domi down the line, and they would add another pretty damn good young forward prospect in their pool alongside guys like Beniers, like Wright, like Cadden, Edward Chalet as well. I think that'd be a pretty solid deal for both parties. And if you're Toronto, if you're not fully sold on Easton Cowan becoming an impact guy relatively soon, maybe you opt for a guy like McCann that, funny enough, they didn't protect in the expansion draft, Kyle Dubas, and get him back as a result. The Winnipeg Jets, they go all in. 2025 first-round pick, Logan Stanley, Lambert, McCann, and Alexiak. This wouldn't work salary cap wise, so maybe you would have to do this in the offseason. But yeah, I would not hate the idea of the Winnipeg Jets doing some kind of deal like this, saying, oh, we'll let Nikolai Ehlers go get paid 8x8 or 7x8.5 because he could only sign 7 years in the free agency market, and instead bring in a guy like McCann that's cost controlled the next 2 years. And yeah, when looking at Alexiak on that second pair left side, you have Josh Morrissey on that top pair left side, offensive beast. Then you got a lockdown guy like Alexiak. I think that this would be a very solid, aggressive move and finally move off Logan Stankoven. Also, Brad Lambert, forgot to point that out. I think this would be a pretty damn good deal for both parties. Seattle would get Lambert, get that first-round pick, and kind of commit to rebuilding, retooling heavily pretty much the next 2 seasons. Jared P26 says, to the Caps for a first, second, LaPierre and Mangiapane. I think you could take that second out or take out Mangiapane, or take out LaPierre, not Mangiapane. You need Mangiapane for the salary cap to work. He makes $5.7 million and isn't really worth $5.7 million this season. Yeah, I think that would be a pretty solid deal for both parties. Washington, McCann kind of fits their core of Strome and Chychrun, kind of that next wave after. They have like 3 different and weird, like 3 different age cores. They got Ovechkin, Carlson, I guess Wilson's kind of in the middle of those 2, but then they have Chychrun, Strome, and McCann in this situation, and then they got their younger up-and-coming guys. Yeah, I think McCann would be a great fit in Washington for the most part in terms of adding serious goal-scoring threat. Would you be that aggressive in terms of mortgaging future assets? To be seen, but I think that if they want to really go for it and think that they can this season in terms of a last-ditch Ovechkin, one last cup run, I think they're set up very well for the next decade, but this might be their best opportunity. Maybe you say, fuck it and go for it. We have good enough of a prospect pool as is. The Montreal Canadiens, Xavier says, a 2025 Montreal third, 2026 unprotected first, and Logan Mailloux. If I was Seattle, I'd be willing to do this. Not saying Montreal's going to suck next year, but an unprotected first would be very valuable. If I'm Montreal, I'm definitely stapling on like a top 5 protection on this. Again, not saying I think they're going to be a good team next year, but yeah, I think that could make sense for both parties. When you look at Seattle, they don't really have a ton of high-level defenseman prospects, especially now that Riker Evans is at the NHL level. Mailloux defensively has a long way to go, but has been highly productive in the AHL in terms of point totals, and even at the NHL level, had like 4 points in 7 games this season. Yeah, if Montreal wants to go for this, instead of some kind of like home run Mikko Rantanen, give him some kind of 7-year deal at 13.5, you maybe just go a little bit cheaper for sure, and Jared McCann the next 2 seasons. My only concern is it a 2.5-year rental after those 2 years? Would you be willing to give McCann some kind of 7-8-year deal because he doesn't exactly fit the age core of your core? I guess he's only 2 years older or 3 years older than Nick Suzuki, but still, I'm not sure I love the fit, but it could be. I think value-wise, it's a pretty solid deal for both parties. Edmonton says, screw it, we're going all in. Kane, Sam O'Reilly, their 2024 first-round pick, a 2026 first, a 2027 second. Part of this is honestly dumping Evander Kane's contract, who's still making $5 million. Effective bottom sixer at this point, but really nothing special. And again, at that cap hit, I don't love it. You could probably take out a second-round pick. I'm not that high on Sam O'Reilly. I think his value is about worth the second-round pick. I don't know why they had to trade their 2025 first to get the 32nd overall pick from the Philadelphia Flyers and take Sam O'Reilly. But yeah, McCann on the Edmonton Oilers, that would be amazing. I think he'd go back to 35, 40 goal pace. The only problem is I'm not sure the Edmonton Oilers' main problem is offense, is forward core, is wingers. I think that you use those kind of assets. If a John Gibson is available he is going to be available this offseason if you don't love what Stuart Skinner does, as well as potentially going after a right-handed defenseman. So value-wise, I think if you take out that second-round pick, it is pretty fair. Fit-wise, it would be awesome to watch. He'd immediately be a beast yet again, going from having Matty Beniers as your center or like Yanni Court to Draisaitl or McDavid. But I'm not sure that would fix the Edmonton Oilers, even though it would definitely, without a doubt, make them a better team. My Islanders, yet again. Dobson for McCann in 2 seconds. if they're going for the retool approach, I guess this could make sense. Instead of giving Dobson some kind of 8-year, $8.5 million contract, they say screw it. And if you're Seattle, the only problem is Seattle just signed Brandon Montour. If they didn't have Brandon Montour, I think this could make sense. Seattle gets a young potential number one defenseman, or him and Dunn as the 1A, 1B. But are you going to trade for Noah Dobson, give him that contract that he wants, and then you're paying Brandon Montour to be a second pair right-handed defenseman at 31 years old, $7 million? For my Islanders, yeah, I think it makes sense in terms of going for a retool. You would definitely have to use those second-round picks to go out and get a replacement for Noah Dobson, but I think value-wise, does make some sense, and it's not like McCann's severely older than Noah Dobson. He's only 3 to 4 years older. Sasha says, Middlestat, a first, a second. That second becomes a first if they make the Cup final. And Mikhail Guliev for McCann and Gord, 50% retained. Yeah, I think that this is a very interesting kind of trade for the Colorado Avalanche. This would be going all in these next 2.5 years, and rightfully so. Nathan McKinnon, although I think he's going to age very well, is 29 years old. You go aggressive like that. You bring in McCann to really bolster. We talk about maybe their middle six is a little bit lacking. If there were like a problem with this team post Blackwood acquisition, it might be some of their forward depth. You bring in Jared McCann, you don't fix your number 2 center problem, but you have a very good second liner in Jared McCann to elevate whoever would be your second line center. I think it could make sense for both parties. And if you're Seattle, you potentially get 2 firsts out of this, as well as Mikhail Guliev. Damn good return for a guy like Jared McCann if you're deciding. And you can maybe rehabilitate Casey Middlestat and eventually flip him down the line. Next up, to Anaheim for Zegras and a second-round pick. I guess this, I don't love the idea of Anaheim selling for a guy that's 28 years old, but I guess if you think that Carlson and McTavish are your centers of the future, and you'd be lucky for Zegras to hit the peak that McCann has hit in prior years in Seattle, I guess maybe you decide we're just going to move off Zegras. He's far too injury prone. The money makes sense on this deal. And if you're Seattle, you saw what you did with Capo Caco, buying extremely low on him. You can maybe rehabilitate Zegras to being a better player, to being what we thought he was going to be after his first 2 years in the NHL. I think it's a half-decent deal for both parties, and obviously the cap makes sense considering McCann makes 5 and Zegras makes 5.75. The New Jersey Devils, Seamus Casey in a first or a few seconds, whatever picks NJ has. Yeah, I think Seamus Casey in a first, or in a second, probably not Seamus Casey in a first, Seamus Casey in a second, in a third, or 2 seconds could make sense. I think Seamus Casey is still a damn good young prospect. And again, looking at Seattle, looking at their defenseman prospects, I think that could make a lot of sense. He's been highly productive in the AHL this season. Maybe Casey in a first, but I think Casey in 2 seconds could make a lot of sense for both parties. Looking at the New Jersey Devils, Timo Meier has kind of flopped pretty drastically this season, and as a result, their winger depth has kind of lacked. I think it could be a solid deal for both parties. They might have to attach Palat. In that case, it would be Palat a first and Seamus Casey to kind of make the salaries work. But yeah, then hopefully you're able to move off Palat. Ottawa, we got Ridley Gregg in a first. This would have to be an off-season trade, considering Ridley Gregg's extension kicks in this summer. So I think that could make sense for both parties. Obviously, Ridley Gregg's a lot younger than Jared McCann, 6 years younger. They kind of hit the reset button, retool button by getting a guy that can hopefully develop into a very effective middle sixer, again, at a very cost-controlled $3.25 million. And if you're Ottawa, if you're concerned about the health of guys like Josh Norris, David Perron has not been that good of a signing. Well, he's been hurt a lot, but you're bringing a guy like McCann to try to contend right now. Maybe you attach Perron in Ridley Gregg in a first to get it done at this year's deadline. That could make sense in terms of getting it done right now. But yeah, I think McCann could be a very good fit in Ottawa. I believe he's an Ontario native. I think he's probably closer to Toronto, though. But home province reunion in this, I think that could make a decent amount of sense. And then lastly, from Wilhelm Norrell, Lekaramaki in a third. I really like Lekaramaki a lot. I think he's still a top 20, top 25 prospect in the NHL. So yeah, I think that might be enough. Maybe Lekaramaki in a second-round pick. I don't foresee Seattle giving up their best forward to Vancouver. Not saying that's some Battle of Alberta kind of rivalry right now, but that is the closest geographical place to Seattle. But I think value-wise, that would make sense. Seattle gets a goal-scoring winger that they can place with Shane Wright, Beniers down the line. Lekaramaki on your power play down the line would be awesome, and I think the value would be pretty solid on that. But let me know in the comments, what do you think about Jared McCann? Should the Seattle Kraken trade him? I understand why they would trade him, just because they're not going to do shit the next 2 to 3 years, and are you going to give McCann at the end of that? They're just stuck in no man's land, so I do like the idea of them potentially moving off him, getting younger after the success of the Capo Caco deal, bet on some young guys to kind of bounce back or get a young prospect. But yeah, Seattle, Ron Francis, if he trades Jared McCann, he should trade him, but also that would be an indictment on his last 2 years because they just signed Stevenson, they just signed Montour, and he should get fired. But yeah, Seattle, at least maybe they're picking a direction. Hopefully they don't trade McCann for like a 32-year-old. That would be a disaster. Hopefully they go young, retool, rebuild. That 2023 season was kind of fool's gold. They shot the shit out of the puck. They did beat Colorado, but they did beat them without Landeskog, and Nichushkin left like mid-series. So yeah, that kind of I'm going on a Seattle rant right now, but that kind of, they got the false sense that they were actually a serious playoff team when it was really just everything went right in that 2023 season. But I think that they could retool relatively soon in terms of getting younger with Joey Decord, with Beniers, with Vince Dunn to potentially be a decent team in 2 to 3 years. But this team right now is not it. So maybe you trade Jared McCann. I'll be seeing you in the next one. Peace.